For the first time in the entire history of chess, a person under 9 years old had defeated a chess grandmaster in a classical chess game. Let me walk you through this historical event because you can learn so much from this 8-year-old guy and of course use it in your own games to destroy your future opponents. What's up, chess player, and welcome to the Journey to Grandmaster, the place where you can improve every single aspect of your chess game. Leonid Ivanovic, 8 years old, from Serbia. Just remember this name because that's going to be a star in the chess world in just a few years. I mean, everybody is already looking at him, everybody writing articles about him because that is just the first time in the entire chess history defeating a grandmaster in classical chess. Now, they talk so much about this grandmaster because, well, he's under 2200 rated, as you can see here, and they're saying, well, you should just give away this title of grandmaster because, well, 2500 is a normal rating of grandmaster and he has 22. It's like too low, you should give the title away. I'm not of that opinion because, well, he's 59 years old, he's not buying his rating, he's not cheating, he just plays chess the way he, can according to his current ability. I mean, he has achieved his title at some point and, well, he played very good. Of course, now he's not at his prime anymore, but I guess he still deserves his respect for continuing playing chess and, well, be a part of, for example, of this historical event here, so that we are able to talk about this amazing achievement of an 8-year-old guy. So I have absolutely no bad feelings about this grandmaster. Tell me please what you think about this whole situation in the comments. Anyway, the game started with c4, knight f6, knight to c3, g6, g3, and c5, the normal symmetrical English opening here. You may know that, well, black has two main setups here, e5 and c5, depending on your preferences, basically. And then the same applies to white. You either have this setup with knight f3 and d3, or you have the system with e3 and knight g2, e2, in which case, well, it's like screaming at you that at some point the d4 move should be played because, well, you need to fight for the center. The center is the part of the board where all of the main actions are happening in chess, so at some point you absolutely need to fight for it. Okay, so castles, knight d2, and finally here after d6, d4 move has been played. But for black, it's a very solid setup. Of course, you know it from the Sicilian defense when you have your move on your pawn on c5, and they have their pawn on e4, and at some point they play d4, you exchange it, and then your bishop is on g7, especially in the dragon variation, it's always there, and, well, that's known to be a very solid one. But there is no pawn on e4, that is quite a huge difference because the bishop is completely open here. Bishop f5, that is the advantage of not having the pawn on e4 because your bishop can be developed actively here. h3, well, both sides are just developing their pieces and that's already cool. I mean, if at the age of 8 years old, you already know that the development is one of the most important things in chess and you must always focus on it. It's already great. I have so many students, I have seen so many games of my viewers who are just not finishing their development and then they're asking me like, why can't I improve? Why am I stuck on my level? Why can't I make any progress? Well, right there, that is the answer. If you don't develop your pieces, if you don't bring all of your available forces into the battlefield, you can never achieve success. So please remember it. And it literally should be every single one of your pieces, not just a handful of them. Well, let's see what happened here. Queen to d7. Yeah, the queen is now also actively taking part in the game, attacking the h3 pawn, so king h2 to protect, and rook c8. Now, all of the pieces are developed, and what's even more important, one move for one piece. It's like the golden rule, and black is following it to the perfection. Now the only piece not developed is his rook, and it's coming to the game as well, which is a mistake according to chess.com. So he's just religiously focused on the development and on this golden rule, but of course, you know, the chess is a complicated game. Unfortunately, it has so many exceptions when you follow the principles and seems like everything is great, but then suddenly you see this question mark and you are like, what? I have developed my pieces, what do you want from me? Well, it turns out, if you do that, you allow your opponent to make this move d5, and that is a great move here, and white made it. The problem with that is not only it is a move with a tempo, it's just blocking all of your forces here. You have developed your queen and rook, but all of them are staring at this pawn on d6, are blocked by that pawn, and you cannot do anything about it. Yes, one good thing is your bishop is going to be a great piece, but everything else is just stuck here. So I hope you already know what should be the right move instead. If not, feel free to pause the video for a second, because the right move is, of course, to play d5. You need to fight for the center. That's another golden principle we have started with. And then, of course, you have those principles somehow competing against each other, and you have to choose what is important, fighting for the center or developing your pieces. You should do all of that, of course, but you can't do that simultaneously, so at some point you should choose. Here, it's better to play d5 first, because you still have an opportunity to play rook d8 later on. But if you start with rook d8, which actually happened in the game, then you no longer have the luxury of playing the move d5, because, well, white just do it themselves, block the entire possibility of you, and then you're stuck with all of your major pieces. So please remember this thing when you're playing your own games. The game continues. Black plays knight to e5, going into the center with the knight. I would be very worried here about the destiny of this knight, because, I mean, the knight doesn't have a lot of good squares. 4 is available for white to attack, but fortunately enough, there is still this d3 square. Okay, so let's see what happened here. Knight to d4 has been played. That is another advantage of the move d5, that you free this d4 square for the knight. The knight is just perfect here. In general, the knights are perfect in the center, because they control so many different squares from here, both in terms of the defense, in terms of the attack. They're just a dream position for the knight. So black played here knight to d3. I'm not sure what the knight is doing, and I'm not a big fan of such moves, because so often it happens that your piece looks fancy, especially the knight, but then if you really think of a practical use of it, you realize it's doing absolutely nothing there. Yes, you might argue it covers those squares, but it's not that significant. White can remaneuver the pieces here along the d file, and that knight might become a liability for you, because, well, it's only protected by the bishop. If you imagine me somehow exchanging it or attacking it and pushing it back, then the knight is suddenly in trouble, and you must always and always keep an eye on it to make sure you don't blunder it. So I'm a fan of practical use of the pieces rather than of a fancy look. The same as in life, but in chess it works. It's dramatically important, because you might just lose your pieces if you are pushing it too far away without a proper support. The engine also confirms that and says that that is actually a huge advantage for white, more than +2 here, but that is just the beginning of this absolutely incredible and historical game. So let's see how black managed to turn the tables around. Knight takes f5 was the right move here, just exchanging that bishop. And you know me, a big fan of pair of bishops in general. I would do it kind of immediately, but white is saying, I don't care about that. I'm gonna play queen d2, which is also a very reasonable move, because this bishop is not gonna get away anytime soon. It has absolutely no squares to go, and my knight on d4 is beautiful. So let me just save it from now, and then in the right time, I'm gonna do that, and I'm gonna take that bishop on f5. At least that is what I would assume, seeing that move queen to d2. But now this knight escapes to the safety, so there is kind of a transposition here, but you waste so much time. I mean, 2 tempi here, that's incredibly huge. Time is the most important resource in chess, and that time gives your opponent an opportunity to create some plan, whether it would be attacking here on the king side or here on the queen side. Anyway, white is controlling pretty much the entire board here, the center, of course, as well. So knight takes f5 happened here, and you see here it's becoming not such a great move. So yeah, I mean, I'm not 100% agree with the engine every time, because, well, why on earth isn't not a great move? Bishop to c5, bishop to d3 maybe was a little bit annoying for white, and, well, we are getting a pair of bishops. Yes, the position is a little bit closed, especially for this guy on g2, but there are ways to open it up for white, and white is still having a huge advantage here. Queen takes, rook coming to d1, of course, back to the development question, very important, and king to h7. This move seemingly just makes sure that the king is in safety, but Chess.com review says it's a mistake. It's not even inaccuracy. I mean, that is quite surprising for me. The right move instead was just to play a6, and that is also a useful move, just to cover the b5 square, maybe to prepare the move b5 at some variations, because black desperately needs some air to fill some targets here to attack, some space to play. So a6 is a good first step for that, but I still find chess.com is too harsh on those moves. Like, mistake, it's not losing anything, it's not dramatically change anything in the position, so hard to say. Rook to e1 has been played. Once again, finishing the development for the white side. Now the rook is active along the e file, potentially putting pressure on that pawn on e7, which is basically the only one unprotected. Rook e8, improving the rook's position, because it's not enough just to develop your pieces. And so many players and viewers and students are asking me that, like, how do you figure out the right squares for your pieces to be developed? Yes, rook has been developed from a8 to d8, but is it really better now on d8 than it was on f8? On f8 it was at least protecting the pawn, which is for now not attacked, but at least it's making a useful thing. On d8 it's not making anything useful, because that pawn on d6 is blocked and you cannot do anything. So black plays rook to e8, where the rook is doing a very important job. First of all, it protects that pawn, because, well, chances are really high that that pawn could have been under attack. Secondly, it prepares some pawn moves, and that would be a huge factor later on in the game. So the rook is really useful here. Try to find, once again, back to the practical use of your pieces as well as your moves, try to find the most useful squares for your pieces. The squares where it supports your plan. And all of that should work like a puzzle together, like putting every piece to have a clear plan, a clear picture of what you're trying to achieve. It's not like you're placing your queen here and trying to play on the king side, whereas your knight is coming over here to a5 trying to play on the queen side. Normally it's not working. You should really have a plan. For example, make e5 possible one day, and then you make all of your moves to achieve that. You place your knights, the bishop, to control that squares as many times as possible, and then of course what's going to happen afterwards, you already should try to plan for a few moves ahead of that. I mean, chess is a strategic game, perfect for planning ahead of time. And so you do that because once you play e5, you think, okay, what's going to happen afterwards? For example, my opponent is going to take en passant, then this b7 pawn is going to be weak, this d6 pawn is going to be weak. What am I going to do about that? Maybe I can, I don't know, place the second rook here so that it's defending that pawn in case that happens, or whatever that might be. But your moves should be logical and following one general goal. Now, black is actually following this rule, but once again makes a mistake according to chess.com. He plays knight f to d7, and I feel like that's logical here, because this bishop on g7 is less active than this guy on d4, and in general, if you're able to open up the dark squares, here you have an advantage as black, because notice this bishop is pretty silly on the g2. Whereas this one is really cool. So if you exchange that guy, and then you're able to make use of those dark squares here, e5, c5, and maybe go on there, d3 and f3, so on, then you have so many ideas. So this exchange actually makes sense for black. The chess.com says it's a mistake because once again he wants to play b6, a6, or even king back to g8, saying that, well, this move king to h7 is so stupid, I cannot continue playing before I put it back on g8. Anyway, knight f to d7, logical move happened, takes, b4. Well, now this knight is kicked away, but there is a price white has to pay for it. The pawns are not going back. That is a very important rule you need to understand in chess. And there are consequences behind every pawn moves, because now the c4 pawn is going to be a target, and that's going to be a headache for white for the time being. But for now, b4 is a very good move because it's kicking the knight away. The knight was very important, controlling here so many squares, and it's going to be passive for a time being, and that gives white some opportunities here to continue their attack. So knight a6 happened, knight goes directly to the center to e4. Even better was to play rook e4, so you use that square e4 somehow, but putting the rook is even better because you control the pawn there, and you're ready to double the rooks and put even more pressure on the pawn on e7. Anyway, knight e4 has been played, also a very good move here. Knight goes to f6, black is continuing exchanging the pieces. That is a very good strategy to remember. If your opponent has the initiative, He has more space in the center. He has more opportunities for his play than you do. Then it's very good, very beneficial for you to exchange some pieces because you have some space problems. So you have like, I don't know, 10 pieces for 8 good squares to place it. You have not enough space for all of your pieces. So if you exchange, let's say, 5 of those pieces, then you have just 5 pieces for 8 good squares. That is much better. You have plenty of space. So exchanging makes a lot of sense when your opponent has the initiative. Knight f6. Queen goes to b2, trying to pin that knight, and actually the queen is pretty active here on the b2 square, but it was much better, according to chess.com, just to play rook to c1 or to play c5, go all in into the attack. That is not the move I would make, but rook c1 makes sense, just to support that pawn. Once again, you need to find the most useful squares for your rook. For all of your pieces and for your rook in particular in this case. So the rook on d file, well, is useful. The file is more or less open here, having a few squares. Like normally they call it an open file where there are any pawns at all, but what I mean is there are some squares here to be active, unlike if your rook would be on a1, for example. But here the rook actually does a useful practical function in defending the pawn on c4, so it's even more useful there. Queen goes to b2, king goes to f8. I don't like that move. That is, like, I don't understand why would you do that, because now your knight is kind of pinned. You can never go anywhere because of king h8 checkmate. I mean, that is a serious concern you now have to deal. Yes, I might understand that he didn't play king to g8 because now there are checks all over the place, and checks, well, normally is not a great thing for you to deal with. But still, king f8 is much worse because now you experience all of those difficulties. Now, there is a particular reason why king f8 is not such a good move in this concrete situation. Let's try to figure it out together. Pause the video for a second and try to find it yourself, and then I'm gonna show you the solution. Because white, even though he is a grandmaster, has failed to find the right move. Okay, I hope you did it this time. Of course, white has the initiative, and now it's vice versa. Remember what I told you about the situation when your opponent has the initiative? Well, when you have the initiative, you must use it. As the first world chess champion said, Wilhelm Steinitz, he said, if you have the initiative, you absolutely must use it. Otherwise, it's gonna disappear, because it's not like an extra pawn that you can just keep at your camp and, well, no matter what happens, the pawn stays with you. No, if you have the initiative and if you don't use it for a few moves, your opponent is going to be able to stabilize the situation, put himself together somehow, and then your advantage is gone. So the way to do that is to open up the position with the move c5. You see, all of your pieces are ready here for the attack. The knight is pinned here, the queen is active, the bishop is kind of closed, and opening up the center, especially moving this d-pawn, would help you with that. So c5 kind of solves all of those issues and just goes forward using your initiative. Just to give you an example of how important the initiative in chess is, this position is absolutely equal in terms of material, but the engine evaluation is +4 for white, and even bigger than that, because, well, the best move that the engine suggests you should do here as black is knight to b8. First of all, it's incredibly passive, but secondly, it's just giving up the full d6 pawn here. That is how bad it is, and the reason why you cannot take it, which would be desirable, because now this pawn goes to the d6 square, and apart from just what we have talked about, opening up the bishop, that would be a positional thing, of course, a plus for white, but it's much bigger than that, because he cannot take it. There is a knight hanging there, the knight cannot move, you remember this checkmate, otherwise d7 is coming, d takes e is coming, just destroying black's position, completely here. So yes, c5 would be absolutely devastating here for black. But instead, white plays bishop to f1, which drops pretty much the entire advantage here, at least from the engine perspective. It was more than +4 after c5, now it's +1.4. So you see how important it is, once again back to the golden rule, how important it is to use your initiative when you have it. Because just one move that is not that active, that is going back, by the way, why on earth would you go back? That is absolutely unexplainable for me. Maybe you want to go to d3, but that is whole too tempting that you could have used actively otherwise. Anyway, one move back and you're losing such a huge percentage of your entire advantage. Two of those moves and the entire one is gone. Here Black finally realized the mistake with king to f8 and king went to g8, the place where it belongs. So yeah, the entire strategy of making that many moves with the same king in the middle game, where actually the king should just stay there as safe as possible. You should ideally not worry about it at all. I mean, don't have a necessity to worry about it and focus on your attack, but instead when you're making that many moves with the same piece, and especially with the king, that's not ideal. It means something went completely wrong for you, and well, Black is still at a huge disadvantage here, but it's already not that bad because, well, c5 at least doesn't win the game. By the way, if you play c5 right now, that would be completely losing, because now I can just take that knight and attack the f2 pawn, and all of that is possible only because White made that stupid move back. Never go back unless you absolutely have to do it. Here White realized that the plan was actually pretty useless, because even if you play bishop d3, yes, you might say you create some discover attack opportunities, but all I need to do is exchange that knight, you take it back, I don't know, with a bishop or with a rook, I don't care, and then I go queen to f6. I just offer you a queen trade, because afterward those pawns will be hanging, otherwise your attack is completely gone. You have this stupid bishop which is still kind of blocked by all of those pawns. All of the pawns are on the light square, so it's very difficult for the bishop to be useful here, whereas, well, this knight might eventually be useful there. For example, now the pawn on b4 is under attack. Anyway, the position is great here, so White realized that and instead played knight, or instead of bishop d3, played knight to f6, which is a little bit better, because here at least this bishop is not blocking that, and still, I mean, it's even better on f1 than it would be on d3. That is how amazing that is. But of course, you should have just left it in peace and instead focus on the real important stuff for you. Queen goes to d2, because exchanging the queens in such a position would be a huge relief for Black. Once the queens are off the board, an attack is over. 99% of cases. Maybe sometimes there are some crazy attacks without the queens against the king, but normally it's never possible. And so if the queens are going off the board, then we are entering the endgame, and completely different laws apply to the endgame. Before that, we didn't really care about the pawn structure, weaknesses, and all of that, because once you deliver a checkmate, nobody worries about your pawns, how ugly it is. But once the queens are off the board and there is no checkmate attack, now it becomes very important that this guy is hanging, this guy is hanging, you have to fight against this e-file, the king, you go back once again to f8, closer to the center, because in the endgame you want your king to be in the center of the board, to be active, to control as many squares as possible. And you still have that stupid bishop on f1, which is doing absolutely nothing, because your pawns are on the light squares, your key pawns here, and if you have a light squares bishop and you're fighting against the knight, ideally you should try to have all of your pawns on the dark squares, because then those pawns are controlling the dark squares, whereas your bishop would be controlling the light squares. Everything is under control. But that way, if you have light squares bishop and all of your pawns on the light squares, then nobody, absolutely nobody, guarding the dark squares. So that is a huge, huge disadvantage. Well, that is a grandmaster we are talking about. Of course, he knows a lot about positional principles, about exchanges, and that is part of the game that you expect him to be much, much stronger, thanks to his experience, than the 8-year-old guy. So, queen to d2 has been played, knight b8. Well, now Black realized that the knight on a6 is absolutely stupid, and you need to relocate it somewhere here, maybe all the way to e5, or if e5 would be not possible, maybe to b6, because, well, c4 is the weakest pawn White has in their camp. Knight b8 has been played, rook e4. Finally, White realizes that is a huge, huge square for the rook. It's guarding the pawn, it's preparing to double the rooks along the e-file. The only sad thing is, of course, this bishop still remains absolutely useless. Knight d7, rook goes to e1, and that right there seems like just a continuation of your plan. But here is such a huge mistake so many players, especially low-rated, but you see even grandmasters, make. You follow your plan blindly without taking a proper look at what your opponent is doing. What are his dreams, hopes, ideas, threats, and that is just not the way it works in chess. You always play against an opponent. You never are alone in chess. So when your opponent played knight d7, you need just to forget about whatever you were thinking here for a second and think, okay, what are the ideas that my opponent has? Why did he play knight d7? And it shouldn't be superficial, like, well, he just improved his knight to d7 and he's better there. No, it can never be like that. You should always think about the future. What could that knight do in the future? Maybe it could go forwards to e5 and then create a huge threat of this royal fork with knight f3. That is a huge problem, so maybe I should prepare against that instead of playing rook e1 and actually making it even worse, because then the rook is also hanging in the end of the day. So that is not the way you think. You always think about your opponent's ideas, and if you conclude that it's dangerous, because sometimes you have the initiative, and when you have a huge initiative, you don't really need to think about your opponent's moves too much, because your ideas are more powerful, your threats are more dangerous than your opponent's. And then instead of just chasing your opponent's threats, which might not even exist, you should focus on your ideas that are much powerful and just destroy your opponents immediately. At the same time, always keep an eye on your opponent's counterplay. Just make sure it's not dangerous for you. But in the case when the position is going to be balanced, I mean, that is, you might still say, a little bit better for white, but not actually that much anymore, because Black has some serious advantages. First of all, we do have just one weakness here on e7, which is very well protected. Other than that, everything is solid, and our knight is definitely superior to this bishop due to the pawn structure. And if that is the case, you need to think about your opponent as being equal to you in terms of activity on the game. It's not like, well, I had this initiative 10 moves ago, I was so much better, so I'm still thinking I'm better here and I need to look for a way to win the game. I was guilty of this mindset so often in the past. Hopefully I improved it now, because you need to adjust your subjective evaluation of the position to what's really happening on the board. You shouldn't think like, well, I'm still great here. No, you need to be realistic. That's very, very important in chess. Sometimes it helps when you're super optimistic. Like it happened to me so many times when the position is absolutely lost, just no hope, no chance, everybody else would just resign. But instead I'm thinking, no, I'm still good here, I have my chances, maybe I'm gonna win the game somehow, let me find a bit of tricks here. That mindset can help. But in terms of taking the right decision, realistic decision, and not going to make your position worse, it's very important to realize that, well, you're not really that much better anymore, and you need to make sure that this idea is not that dangerous for you and do something about it. Okay, enough of me talking. The right way to play was king to g2, and then, yeah, guard this f3 square maybe one more time with queen e3 or queen e2. Instead, rook e1 has been played, now knight e5. That one is a problem, and also this pawn is also under attack. So, for example, bishop to g2 wouldn't be a way to help, because then you lose the c4 pawn. But it has been played here anyway, and that just loses a huge pawn, so you cannot do that. You can still play rook 1 to e3, which is rather a complicated move, but yeah, let's see what's going to happen here. So the pawn on c4 is protected, but what about knight f3? Because that's still a royal fork, and seems like you're giving up an exchange, and you do. But apparently white gets some kind of compensation here thanks to the move rook f4, and then this queen doesn't feel that great. It has to go all the way to a3, the absolutely only move, and then bishop e2, and suddenly you have some ideas here, whereas those rooks are completely passive on the ace rank. And your queen is offside on the queen side, not being able to help in terms of this attack. So I would be a little bit worried here as black. You are able to maintain everything, but yeah, it's not that simple as a human being, not as a computer. Anyway, let's go back to the game. That was a very difficult idea, I have to say. This sacrifice, I mean, that's not simple by any means, because going anywhere with your king doesn't help. Knight f3 is still winning an exchange. Going anywhere with your queen also doesn't help, because knight f3 still wins an exchange. So that is a tough spot white has put itself here. So bishop e2 also doesn't help. That would be a desirable move to prevent that, while still protecting that pawn, because now the f2 pawn is hanging. Actually, this position is completely lost now. So bishop to g2 has been played, and now rook takes c4, and it's clear that Black is overtaking the initiative at this point. It's still tricky, of course. White is trying to put some pressure, and that's what you should do as well. Once you have lost a pawn or something, or your opponent is overtaking the initiative, shouldn't just give up and stop the game and go home. No, you need to find those opportunities to put some pressure on him, to find some counterattack. For example, if you are some material down, the only real thing you can do is to go all in into the attack. You have nothing to lose anymore, right? You're already down in terms of material, because if you are not active, your opponent is just going to exchange as much stuff as possible and crush you in the endgame. So all you have left to do is to go forward and hope you have some tricks, you have some threats to create, and that would put pressure on your opponent, and he's going to collapse eventually, make mistakes, and you're going to take advantage of that. So that is what white is doing here. F4 takes, knight d7. Yes, you can say white is a little bit more active, but this bishop is still not doing much. That is a huge problem. But remember that bishop f1, it went back to g2 eventually, so white wasted 2 tempi and in the process lost the entire initiative, and instead of +4, it's now -1.3 here. So queen went to c2, h4. That is a very interesting move. The Chess.com review says it's a miss, but actually it's a very good move here, because notice that those pawns are conveniently protecting each other and the king protects the g3 pawn. But once you disrupt all of that there, then the f4 pawn is going to be a weakness, and this rook has absolutely to guard it, because otherwise that would be a disaster. And yeah, you are just making it less convenient for your king. As white, you don't have any choice. Either you take or g4, anyway, your king is becoming more exposed. The reason why h4 is a miss, because there was knight b6, which attacks that pawn on d5 and simultaneously prepares rook to c8 with the tempo. Okay, but h4 is still a very interesting move, g4, and now knight b6 has been played, so no problems for black at all. Everything they wanted, they have achieved so far. Now, king once again to f8. I mean, this king is wandering back and forth through the entire game. In this case, the point is to protect the e7 pawn so that this rook is ready to go there, but I guess that's not really necessary. You can just play rook c8. e7 pawn is protected for now. By the way, that is a mistake so many players, especially low-rated players, are making. You are just overprotecting against some threats that don't even exist. I mean, instead of just going all in with your plan and be very active here, you are imagining that maybe this e7 pawn is going to be lost, and then you need to do something about it. You might say, wait, but white has a huge idea here of playing g5 and just attack the queen. The queen is gone, and then the e7 pawn is gone. Yes, all of that is true, but to achieve that, white will need to put this rook to e7, so it's not there to protect anymore. So I can just play queen f5, the most obvious move here, the strongest square. And then if you take there, then you have so many interesting ideas. You have here rook to c2, which you should be careful about, because there is also an idea for white here to deliver a checkmate. But there is another one, which is more difficult to find. That's why I can understand why black played king f8 in the first place. That is knight takes d5. That happens so often that if you have all of your pieces active, then there is going to be some kind of tactical opportunity. And yes, if you really think about it, it becomes easy. Now Chess.com gives a brilliant sign here, because it is a sacrifice here. But if you really think about it, you can take it only as with the bishop or with the queen as white. So if bishop takes, you're just losing your queen in one move. So it's really not that difficult. Rook c2, the queen is gone, the game is over. Well, you might say that you have rook f7 or something like that, but it never helps, because all of that is taken with checks, and checkmate is coming immediately. Bishop takes, check also doesn't help. You can just step away. Anyway, rook c2 wins the game. If you take with the queen, however, then once again, remember always to use the 4 steps system formula to find the best move in every possible position. Those are the checks, the captures, the threats, and the active moves. Well, queen f4, you always start with the check, and then king goes to the first rank, your rook is coming, and that is just a checkmate immediately. So that would be a fantastic finish to this incredible game. Unfortunately, it has been played because, well, prophylaxis is what black thought about it here and played king to f8. Well, you can understand them as well. You don't want to spoil your game. You don't want to sacrifice your pawn if it's not necessary. But yeah, queen f5, still a big advantage for black. Rook goes to d4, and it's quite a good defender here, defending pretty much all of the weak pawns, but it's becoming such a passive piece. Its whole purpose of it is just to defend here. A very instructive moment here. Rook c8 has been played now, and we said, well, we want to activate our rook, and that's true. The rook was doing absolutely nothing on e8. The e7 pawn is not in danger anymore. But remember, you don't follow your plan blindly without thinking what your opponent can do. Because white just played rook to d4 here. And you should think about this move. You should forget about everything you have thought earlier and just think, what is the purpose of this move? And the problem in chess is that, well, it's a very complicated game, and there can be more than one purpose of a move. Not only white is playing rook d4 to protect all of those guys, white is also playing that to make this e4 square available for this bishop, so that that bishop finally makes one useful thing in the entire game. He plays bishop e4 here, which is a great move, attacking that queen, pushing it back, and then the queen is not that dangerous anymore. If you realize that threat early on, and you do that if you think about your opponent's moves, and if you use the 4 steps system formula not only for yourself, but very important also for your opponents in terms of what kind of opportunities he has, checks, captures, threats, and active moves, that is a threat. And as there are no checks and no captures for white available, that is basically the first thing you should take a look at. Then you would never play rook c8, because you would think, well, I don't want to go back with my queen, I don't want to be passive there, so what can I do about that? Well, I have the move queen to b1. Then the queen is absolutely fantastic there, and nobody can take that move rook c8 away from me. It's still coming, and then white is in big trouble. So that would be the best move here, but rook c8 has been played instead. Now bishop e4, not only pushing the queen back, but also guarding this very key c2 square. Queen has to go back. And now the position is once again balanced, nobody has an advantage, and both kings are pretty weak, because finally white is making use of that bishop. f5 is a great move here because it's another sacrifice, and then white wants to push the g-pawn and get to that king via queen h6. Maybe even this rook, which we said is absolutely passive, might join the attack, who knows. Of course, you need to be careful with the counterplay in the meantime, because your king is also not the safest one on the planet. Black played g takes f, because otherwise, well, the f file is going to be open, the pawn was hanging, bishop goes to d3. Now, that is a mistake, because the initiative. Once again, it's all about the initiative. You normally have just one shot, especially if you are playing against a very strong player, you just have one shot to make use of your attack, to find that very active opportunity to be able to create dangerous threats for your opponent. And of course, we already know where to attack, what to attack. Of course, that's the king, the only thing you can attack here as white, and g6 is really the way to do it, because queen h6 is basically a checkmate in 2 threats. So it's not like you're sacrificing the bishop. I mean, that is just checkmate in a few moves, and pretty straightforward moves, either queen h7 or queen to h8 immediately if king goes to e8. So all you sacrifice here maybe is the pawns. And here something truly amazing happens, and I guess that's the reason why white didn't play the move g6. It's much more complicated than you think. Queen goes to h6, king goes to f7. Now if you play queen h7, which seems to be the most obvious move, then white is completely lost. It's just counterintuitive, because you go forward in the open position with your king. That normally is just suicidal, but not this time, because after queen takes h4, you just go to g7, and there are absolutely no checks anymore. And here queen h8 is not possible, all of the checks are covered, and otherwise you're 2 healthy pawns up. Well, in case of that, 1 pawn, but attack is over, and now you are the one creating threats for your opponent. But in this position, there is a truly amazing move, and that is the one I would call really brilliant. Bishop takes f5. Another sacrifice. Now, if you take it with the queen, it's still far, far from being over. After rook f4, white is winning the queen, but black in the meantime gets quite a lot of material here. King goes to g1, knight to d5, d5, all of the pieces are active here. Takes. I would argue that it's still simpler to play as white in such a position, because as black, you always need to keep an eye on all of your pieces. Your king is exposed. There is always a chance to blunder something. As white, well, 99% you will always have some kind of a perpetual check, so you're not really in danger of losing the game, but you have plenty of ways to win the game. First of all, you can try chasing all of those pieces, try attacking it, combining it with checks, of course, and also you might just take that pawn and create a passer and just go on, and well, good luck for black trying to deal with all of those threats. And now let's go back to this critical position after bishop takes f5. Well, now the pawn is hanging, the queen is hanging, so the bishop has to be taken somehow. But if you take with the pawn, now the king is really exposed, and now you have this perpetual check, because queen h6, you have absolutely nowhere to hide. If you go to e5, then it's going to be problematic. Queen g7, checkmate in 1. Otherwise, perpetual check. So you see, g6 was a really huge opportunity here for white. I mean, that is very difficult to calculate, and I can totally get why white haven't got it till the end. Very complicated combination. But when you want to go back, then not bishop to d3, that is a real mistake. The right move was bishop to b1. That is also a retrieving move. Also, still the bishop is on this diagonal and also controlling the c2 square. So the only difference, you are not blocking the d file, your d5 pawn is still protected twice, the rook on d4 is still protected, and that somehow makes a huge difference here, because after bishop d3, black is once again having a huge initiative. It's minus 1.5, but only if you find the right move. And this time, black found this fantastic move, and I of course offer you to do the same. Pause the video for a second, a very instructive moment, and find the only move that gives a huge advantage here for black. I hope you have managed to do that. The right move is the move e5. Remember, I told you something about this pawn on e7. Someday it's going to be a star, someday it's going to be making a huge role. And now you see the difference. This bishop is just making it more difficult for white to handle those problems. The rook has absolutely no squares to go, so you have to take it here, or you have to take it on h4. That is, of course, the first question you ask yourself. I mean, that is a free pawn, the rook is very active, what happens? But here, very important that, and that is actually exactly what happened in the game, very important that the bishop is on d3, and now the d5 pawn is not protected by the queen, and black is taking advantage of that, or better to say, black should have taken advantage of that and take on d5, which is another scary move. I mean, the position is crazy on itself. Both sides are attacking the kings, and rook h8 is in the air, knight f4 is in the air. But here, king g7, you are actually hiding, and that pawn helps you a lot, because, well, queen cannot join the attack here. And this knight is coming, and then everything is great. You have actually three central pawns here going forward, 3 connected passers. In terms of the endgame prospects, that is a fantastic position. So yeah, knight d5 was a great choice. There are some weird moves like bishop to b5 here, because then your rook is hanging there, but it's still not enough, because the attack is over, the king is secure, white's king is pretty open, and there is a huge pawn storm coming white's side there, and well, that's objectively much better for black +2 here, but also from a human perspective. I mean, this queen and knight, that is a huge combination, and your king is absolutely naked. How on earth are you gonna survive here as white? I have absolutely no answer to that. Now, let's go back to the game, because as you have noticed, black made a blunder here. He played, instead of knight d5, e4. I'm not actually sure what the idea. Maybe to make sure that that bishop is not attacking the f5 pawn anymore, because actually pushing the bishop back just helps white, because, well, the pawn is going to be protected there. And also, what's very important, you are opening up the diagonal. That is extremely dangerous. Imagine the queen on f6, well, the game is over immediately. But it's worse than that, because now, once again, white gets a tempo. Very important when both kings are under attack, and it's all about attacking the opponent's king. You don't want to give your opponent a free tempo. And black said, well, I'm not giving a free tempo because I'm attacking that guy on d3, so he has to do something about that. Well, unfortunately, chess is not checkers. If you are attacking one of your opponent's pieces, he's not obliged to do something about it, because maybe he can create a counter threat which is more dangerous. And it turns out he can, because here, once you take that bishop, there are so many different ways for whites to win the position. Still not simple. I'm absolutely not saying that. Very difficult to understand that, for example, queen g5 is just a checkmate in a few moves here, and not something else, like not a check, queen takes queen to h6, not a check, rook h8. Queen g5, very important, because you control those squares. The king has absolutely no way to escape, and then the rook is coming with devastating effect. And of course, you need to calculate what's going to happen here. but the king has a way to hide f4 and just king f3. And then you notice that there is absolutely no way to give a check. Rook f2 just sacrifices the rook, but that doesn't help. And then black is checkmated here. Okay, so g6 was a huge chance here. Instead, white also sacrificed the bishop, but played bishop takes e4. I definitely don't get this move. I mean, it doesn't help your attack. Normally, you sacrifice your pieces when you can achieve something for it. But bishop takes e4 doesn't help you. I mean, it's not about the pawns. I don't think that white thought, well, if I play g6, for example, I sacrifice the bishop completely, and if I play bishop takes e4, then I win a pawn for it. Doesn't make any sense, right? It's not about the pawns here, it's about the fact who is going to be the first one to deliver a checkmate. And from that perspective, bishop e4 doesn't help at all. So I wonder what white was thinking with that move. Anyway, what happened is bishop takes, and now g6, exactly the same thing, but just wasting that tempo. If you play g6 immediately, then you still have your bishop alive here, and your opponent has to spend another tempo to take it, which makes an entire difference. I mean, this position is completely winning for white. Takes, queen g5, it's a checkmate. But this position, after bishop takes e4, takes, and g6, is completely winning for black. You know the difference? Now instead of queen g5 and checkmate for white, black is playing queen to f5, and it's a checkmate for white in a few moves. That is how important time in chess is. Chess is a tragedy of one tempo. One tempo is the difference between the greatest victory and the most painful loss. So please remember about that and don't waste your time in chess. And hopefully you also do that in your life, because time is still the most precious thing we all have on this planet. Anyway, white played here at g7, trying to continue the attack, but now another great move, king to e7. You don't want to deal with that pawn, because if you take, that's going to be checkmate in 2. If you go to g8, it's also going to be checkmate in 2. They check and takes and queen h6 checkmate. So you just go away. You want to make sure, once again, not about the pawns, but about making sure that your king is secure. In such a position, that's the only thing that matters. Now, rook went to g4, supporting that pawn and just threatening to promote. So rook g8 is essential. It's a very passive rook now, but very important to deal with that. And then you have an active queen. The knight is finally ready to join the party. Once that happens, you have just a huge initiative. First, white plays rook to g5. That is a good move, because that protects the pawn and pushes the queen away. Queen goes to g2, queen f4 check, and now black is starting to create some threats. Basically, just exchanging the queens is enough for black. You remember, when you have extra material, you want to exchange everything that moves. The more guys are going off the field, like you imagine a football or a soccer game, if you have 11 players against 10, yes, that is an advantage, but your opponent is still able to fight against. But if you have like 2 players against 1, or better, 1 player against 0, that would be immediate game over. That is what black's task is here. And of course, once you exchange the queens, there is absolutely no way for whites to deliver you a checkmate. That is a very nice side bonus. That is why white played here king h1, just to deal with that threat, because after queen f2 you have queen f4 check. Now black plays f5, once again threatening just to play queen f4 and exchange those queens, and the game is over. And once again, white is stopping that threat, so I can say that at this point players are playing very high quality moves and just keeping an eye on each other's threats, very important in chess. And this rook not only stopping this threat, but actually coming to his seat. That might be dangerous. So black just escapes in the right point. Another best move. You see the quality of the game is suddenly amazing. Rook goes to e6 anyway. Queen goes to d4. That is a double attack, the most active square for the queen here. White plays rook takes d6. An incredible rook sacrifice, because once again, if you are some material down, but you have the initiative, you must use it. You must take those chances. Yes, the position is absolutely losing, so you might as well just risk sacrificing everything, and maybe those tactics somehow work out for you. At least I had so many games like that. Unfortunately, didn't work out this time, but white still tried to do their best, because queen is coming to f7, attacking that rook with a check. Knight goes to d7, another great move. You see, all of the best moves are happening here on the board, and finally, black managed to take it under control e2, and it turns out black is the first one to promote a pawn. That is good enough, because basically the first one just wins. Queen e6, The problem is the pawn is taken, and now all black needs to do is to exchange the queens, having the extra knight in the opponent game. That is exactly what happened here. Queen goes to e5, queen to b5, fighting that way to exchange, and white resigned because yes, you can fight when you still have a queen, you have a ways to give a check, you can somehow create something, but without the pieces. It's exactly this situation when you have 0 against 1, you have absolutely no chances. That is the moment this historical event happened, white resigned, and an 8-year-old boy defeated a chess grandmaster in a classical chess game as black. I really want to know what you think about this achievement, what you think about all of those kids, just incredible geniuses, just crushing everybody around. It wasn't the case even like 15 years ago, 8-year-old, that wasn't possible. What has changed? Whether technology influences this trend happening or I don't know what. But in this video, I have prepared for you an incredible story of another 8-year-old guy that defeated 2 super grandmasters, not like 2200 rated grandmasters, but literally 2600 super grandmasters in 2 days. You absolutely have to take a look at it.